Disclaimer: this program contains graphic descriptions of real crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. For 23 years, I lived a quiet life with a gentleman named Illy. He was a painter. I loved him, and every single morning, without fail, he would make his coffee in the same chipped, blue ceramic mug. He'd cradle it in his hands, look out at the mountains, and his eyes would go far away. I never asked him about it. Some silences between people are sacred. The day the detectives showed up at our cabin with their cold case files and their new DNA science was the day that silence ended. They told me the mug wasn't just a mug, it was evidence, the key piece of evidence in my own murder. You see, my name wasn't always Martha. A lifetime ago, before the running and the hiding, I was Lena Martin. And Lena Martin vanished without a trace 25 years ago. The police believed the man I loved killed me. They believed that mug was his trophy, but Illy wasn't a killer, he was a target, and so was I. We were both hunted by the same man, a corporate fixer named Stern, for something Illy had witnessed. The night Stern came for us, I shoved that mug into Illy's hands. It was a stupid, romantic thing to do. I told him, wherever you go, drink from this. Think of me, I'll find you. It was a promise, and Illy kept it. For 10 lost years, that cup was the only thread between us, a secret signal in a world that thought we were both dead. The detective, a weary man named Cruz, laid it out in my kitchen. The DNA from the coffee cup broke the case, he said, but not in the way we thought. They found 2 profiles on the old ceramic. One was Illy's. The other belonged to Stern, the man who wanted us erased. That's when I knew I had to tell them the whole story. I had to tell them about the last time I saw Stern alive. It wasn't the night I disappeared. It was 3 weeks later in a sterile office. He had my blue mug on his desk. He was drinking whiskey from it, smiling. He said it was a souvenir from the whore's apartment. That's what he called my home. That mug was on his desk the day Illy finally found him. So the question the detectives came to my door with wasn't really who killed Lena Martin. The real question, the one that had haunted me for 2 decades, was much simpler and much worse. What did my quiet, gentle husband do to the man who stole my life and my favorite coffee cup? I told the detectives everything. About the night Stern broke down my door, about Illy escaping out the fire escape, clutching that ridiculous mug like it was the most precious thing in the world, about the 3 days of darkness that followed for me. Stern's questions weren't really questions. They were drills, searching for a weakness in a story I didn't even know. He didn't just want the tape Illy had taken. He wanted to erase the witness, to erase us. I told them how Detective Keller, the man who originally hunted Illy, helped me escape. A single spark of guilt in a man who'd sold his conscience. He gave me cash and a warning that echoed for years. Disappear, or he'll kill you both. So Lena Martin died on a roadside, her belongings left in a ditch. Martha was born from sheer necessity, but Illy didn't disappear. He went hunting. For 10 years, while I was building a ghost life, he was chasing a shadow. Stern, he used the only thing he had to connect us, the mug. He'd place coded ads in the back of obscure music papers. For sale, blue coffee mug, vintage. I'd search for them in every town I landed in, my heart in my throat. I'd reply to a post office box. Is the chip on the left or right handle? His answer would tell me what city he was in, if he was safe. It was our only thread. Then one day the ad stopped. For 18 months there was nothing. I was sure he was dead, that Stern had won, and then a letter, no return address, just a single key, a map to this cabin, and 2 words in his familiar, sloping handwriting: the chip is in the past. I came here. I found him. He was thinner, older, with a stillness in him that hadn't been there before, a peace that looked a lot like exhaustion. We never spoke about the lost years, not directly. We just started. He painted, I wrote. We built a life on a foundation of silence. But now, with the detectives in our home, that silence was cracking. Dr. Annie Sharma, the geneticist. Her voice was gentle but relentless. The DNA evidence suggests a violent struggle. She said, Stern's cells weren't just on the cup from casual handling. They were mixed with Illy's, deep in the ceramic. It was a forceful transfer. I looked at Detective Cruz. You want to know if Illy murdered him? Cruz held my gaze. The official report calls Stern's death an unsolved drowning. Body found in a river with blunt force trauma. No suspects, but if it was self-defense, Mrs. Vance, we need to know. The statute of limitations on murder doesn't expire. The room was too small, the weight of all those years pressed down. I walked to the window, looking at Illy's studio, where his last, unfinished painting still sat on the easel. He never told me the details, I said, and that was the truth. But he told me enough. He found Stern. He confronted him. He just wanted Stern to tell him where I was, to confirm I was even alive. Stern laughed. He showed him the mug sitting there on his desk like a prize. He told him I was gone. That's the word he used, gone. I turned back to them, my hands steady now. Illy said something snapped in him then, a clarity. He said the fight wasn't about the tape or the secrets or even about running anymore. It was about that mug, about taking back the one piece of me he thought he had left. I saw Dr. Sharma's eyes dart to the mug on our shelf, repaired with streaks of gold. Kintsugi, the art of mending broken things with precious metal. Illy had learned it for this one thing, so he fought Stern for it, Cruz asked. He fought Stern because of it. I corrected him softly, and when it was over, Stern was dead and the mug was broken. Illy took the pieces. He ran, and for the first time he stopped running. He came here. He waited for me. He put it back together. Cruz leaned forward. Where is the data tape, Martha, the thing that started it all? A sad, quiet smile touched my lips. Illy never had it. I said, not really. He'd hidden it the night he fled my apartment. He buried it in the only place he knew they'd never look. Where? In the case of his guitar, I said. The guitar he left leaning against my kitchen table. The police took it as evidence. It's probably been in a property storage locker for 25 years. Stern and his people, they were chasing a ghost. They tortured 2 lives for a secret that was sitting in a dusty box the whole time. The detectives were silent, absorbing the brutal, stupid irony of it. All that pain, all for nothing. Dr. Sharma finally spoke, her voice full of a scientist's awe. The cup. It wasn't a trophy. It was a witness. It held the truth in its cracks this whole time. It held a promise. I whispered. That's all. Cruz closed his notebook. We can clear his name, Martha, officially, for the theft, for your disappearance, the self-defense claim, given Stern's profile, and the coercion of a witness. It'll hold. I nodded, feeling emptied out. Thank you. After they left, I went to Illy's studio. I picked up the repaired mug. Its golden seams warm under my fingers. I looked at his last painting. It wasn't a landscape. It was a portrait of me as I was at 25, laughing, holding a chipped blue mug. And in the bottom corner, his final signature, a message he'd left for me, for this day, knowing it would eventually come. The chip is in the past, but the gold is ours. I held the mug to my chest, and finally, after 23 years of quiet happiness and unspoken dread, I let myself weep. Not for the tragedy, but for the love that had outlived it, a love that a cup had carried across the decades, and that DNA in the end had finally spoken aloud. Clearing a dead man's name is a slow, bureaucratic process. It moves in fits and starts through paperwork and official reviews. Detective Cruz was good to his word. He filed the motions, presented the new evidence, the DNA from the cup, Keller's deathbed confession, the proof that the long-lost data tape had indeed been sitting in an evidence locker for a quarter-century. They posthumously exonerated Elias Vance for the theft. The warrant for his arrest was voided. A small, dry article appeared in the digital archives of the city newspaper. Cold case reclassified. New evidence clears suspect in decades. Old disappearance. But a name on a screen couldn't give me back the years we spent looking over our shoulders. It couldn't give Illy back the career he might have had, the music he never played again after he lost that guitar. The justice felt hollow, a transaction that couldn't quantify our loss. What I wanted was something else, something the system couldn't provide. I found it in the form of a name, Richard Voss, Stern's superior at Omni Corp. The man who gave the orders. He'd retired years ago, rich and respected, sitting on charitable boards, a pillar. I did my research quietly. I still knew how to be invisible. A week after the case was officially closed, I put on a simple black dress, something Martha would wear, and I walked into the grand atrium of the city's art museum during a fundraiser. I saw Voss from across the room, holding a champagne flute, laughing. He looked like a man who had never lost a night's sleep. I waited. I moved through the crowd until I was standing beside him, looking at a monstrously expensive abstract painting. Powerful, isn't it? He said, gesturing with his glass, assuming I was part of the donor class. It is. I agreed, my voice calm. It reminds me of something, the way some things look clean and orderly from a distance. But when you get close, all you see is the violence underneath, the struggle and the brushstrokes. He gave a polite, patronizing smile. A poignant interpretation. I turned to look at him fully. Do you know what else is poignant, Mr. Voss? DNA, what it can cling to, what it remembers long after people try to forget. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes changed. They became very still, like a security camera switching on. I'm sorry, have we met? No, but you knew a man who worked for you, Arthur Stern. There was the faintest twitch at the corner of his eye. A barely perceptible drain of color. That was a long time ago, a tragedy. It was, I said, taking a small step closer. My heart was a hammer, but my hands were steady. And it's been solved, the cold case he was connected to. They used DNA from a coffee cup. Isn't that remarkable, the science they have now? It can pull truth from the smallest, most overlooked things. I let the words hang in the air between us, surrounded by the murmur of money and culture. I'm glad to hear it, he said, his voice tighter now. Now, if you'll excuse me, the cup was mine, I said, stopping him. Stern took it from my apartment after he had me kidnapped. He drank from it while he decided what to do with me. He left his cells all over it. And then the man you all hunted for it, Elias Vance. He took it back. He killed Stern for it, and he kept it for 25 years. Voss was pale now. He looked at me, truly looked, and I saw the moment recognition dawned, not of my face, but of my story, of the ghost he thought had been buried. You, he breathed, me, I said quietly. Lena Martin, except I'm not gone, and Ellie's name is clear, and every piece of your operation, every dirty move Stern made under your orders, is now part of a freshly opened investigative file on an active homicide. Detective Cruz is very thorough. He's especially interested in corporate coercion and obstruction. He's looking at everything with new eyes, modern eyes. I wasn't bluffing. Cruz had promised me that much. The exoneration was just the first step. The scrutiny was the second. Voss's composure was cracking. I don't know what you're talking about. Any actions Stern took were his own. Of course they were. I said, my tone ice cold. That's always the way, isn't it? But here's what I want you to know, Mr. Voss. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for you to see, look at me. I am the consequence. I am the price your company paid, standing here in a black dress. My husband is the price in an early grave. Every morning for 23 years, he drank from a cup that held the DNA of the man you sent to destroy us. Think about that. Every single morning. I could see the horror of it hitting him, not as a legal liability, but as a human image. A man drinking from a haunted cup forever. You won't be arrested, I said, turning to leave. You're too clever for that. You'll probably die rich in your bed, but you will spend every day from now on waiting for a knock, waiting for another piece of forgotten evidence to surface, waiting for the past to rise up from something as simple as a coffee cup. You'll live in suspense you created for us. That's your sentence. I walked away, leaving him standing frozen before the violent, expensive painting. I went home to the cabin, to the silence that was no longer fearful, but full. I took the blue mug from the shelf. I made a pot of tea. I sat on the porch as the sun set behind Illy's mountains. I poured the tea into the mug, watching the liquid settle, catching the last of the light in its golden seams. I raised it to my lips and drank. It was just tea. It was just a mug, but it was also a promise, kept across a lifetime. It was a weapon that had broken a man's nerve tonight. It was a witness that had finally spoken. It was the love of my life saying good morning to me for 23 years. The case was broken. The mystery was solved. But this quiet moment, the warmth in my hands, the memory in the ceramic, this wasn't an ending. It was the thing that remained after the story was over. The proof that some things once mended are stronger at the broken places. I held the cup close, and for the first time since the detectives arrived, I felt no dread, only a deep, unshakable peace. The story was finally, completely ours. The peace held for almost a full year. I thought the story was truly over. I tended the garden Illy had planted. I finished the book I'd been writing, a quiet novel about a woman who creates a new life under a new name in a place where no one knows her past. I sent it to a publisher with just my initials, M.V. The quiet was a gift I was learning to accept. Then a plain envelope arrived, no stamp, hand, delivered to my mailbox. Inside was a single, glossy photograph. It showed the blue mug, my blue mug, but not on my shelf. It was sitting on a stark white surface, under the harsh, clinical light of what looked like a laboratory. A ruler was placed beside it for scale. It was a forensic evidence photo, but not one from Cruz's case file. My blood went cold. Written on the back in block letters was a message. A witness can still be lost. Some silences are safer. They'd found me, not the law, the other side. The parts of Omnicorp that Richard Voss's panic and Cruz's new scrutiny had stirred up from the shadows. They weren't sending lawyers. They were sending a reminder. They knew where I lived. They knew what mattered to me. The mug wasn't just a symbol to them anymore. It was a point of leverage, the one piece of physical evidence that tied their old crimes to my present. I didn't call Cruz. Bringing in the police felt like lighting a flare in the woods. It would show me where I was, but it would also show them that I was scared, that I could be pressured. I sat at my kitchen table, the photograph trembling in my hand, and I realized I had a choice. I could run again, Martha could disappear, and some new woman with a new name could start over again. But I looked out at Illy's studio, at his unfinished painting, now covered in a fine layer of dust. I thought of the weight of all those years of silence, of looking over my shoulder. I was tired. More than that, I was angry. They had taken my first life. They had haunted my second. Now they wanted to terrorize my third. They wanted to take the one object that connected all three. No, I went to the cedar chest, the one that held the artifacts of our life. Beneath Illy's old sketchbooks and our faded photographs, I found what I was looking for. A small, fell-trapped bundle. Inside were the original broken shards of the mug, the pieces Illy had collected from Stern's office floor, the pieces he'd carefully saved before the kintsugi, before the mending. He'd kept them, he once told me, to remember what it cost. I held one of the larger fragments, its edge still sharp. This wasn't just ceramic. It was a piece of the past that had drawn blood, Stern's blood. Illy's resolve, my fear. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about fighting them. It was about taking away their power, about rewriting the story one last time. I placed the repaired mug on the table. I took the photograph. And I wrote a reply, not on paper. I drove 2 towns over to a library and used a public computer. I created a new, untraceable email address. I attached a scanned image of the mug, whole and golden, on my table. I wrote only one line, "You're right, a witness can be lost, come and see." Then I waited. 3 days later, a black SUV pulled up my long gravel drive at dusk. 2 men got out. They weren't thugs. They wore expensive casual wear, but they moved with a predatory efficiency. They came to the door. I opened it before they could knock. The lead man, younger than Stern had been but with the same cold eyes, gave a thin smile. "Mrs. Vance, we've come for the artifact to ensure its safekeeping. I know why you're here," I said, my voice calm. "Come in." They exchanged a glance, surprised by my compliance. They stepped inside, their eyes immediately scanning the room, landing on the mug, which sat alone in the center of the kitchen table. "There it is," the second man said, moving towards it. "Stop!" I said. It wasn't a shout, it was a command. He paused, frowning. I walked to the table, standing between them and the mug. I picked it up. "This is what you want," I said, cradling it. "The witness, the thing that holds Stern's DNA, Ellie's DNA, the whole messy, bloody story. You think if you take it, you bury the evidence. You think you break the last thread." The lead man nodded. "It's for the best, for everyone's closure." I smiled then, a real smile. "Oh, I have closure, but you don't understand. The DNA didn't just break the case. It broke your hold on me." I looked down at the mug in my hands. "You sent me a photo of this in a lab. You wanted to show me you could reach into my home, take the most precious thing in it. You wanted the silence to return. My fingers found the largest, most central golden seam. But the silence was never safe. It was a prison." I looked the lead man dead in the eye. "Ellie didn't just mend this cup to make it whole again. He mended it to make it visible, to make our story something beautiful that could sit on a shelf in the light. You can't threaten me with something I'm no longer afraid to lose." And before they could move, I raised the mug high above my head and brought it down with all my strength onto the hard edge of the stone hearth. The sound was catastrophic in the quiet cabin, a shattering, ringing crash. The mug exploded into 100 pieces, the new breaks jagged and white, the old golden seams now dangling from fragments. The two men stared, stunned. They hadn't come prepared for this. I knelt on the floor, not crying, but breathing heavily. I picked up a piece, holding it up so they could see the intricate, ruined filigree of gold. "The evidence is gone," I said, my voice raw with triumph. "You can't take it. You can't control it. It's just broken pottery now. But the story, that's everywhere. It's in the police files Cruz has. It's in the book I wrote. It's in the soil of the garden Ellie planted. It's in me." I stood up, brushing the dust from my knees. "You can leave now. There's nothing here for you to steal." They stood, immobilized by the sheer, illogical finality of my act. They had come for a piece of evidence and found a woman willing to destroy her own treasure to be free of them. There was no playbook for this. Finally, the lead man shook his head, a grudging, confused respect in his eyes. They left without another word. I swept up the fragments, every last one. I didn't save them. I put them in a bag, and the next day I drove to the river that ran through the valley below our cabin. I stood on the same bank where Ellie used to paint. I opened the bag and let the pieces fall into the current, the old and the new, the ceramic and the gold. They glittered for a second in the sun, then were swallowed by the water, carried away to become part of the riverbed. I felt a final release, deeper than any document of exoneration could provide. They had taken the cup from me once, through violence. Now I had given it back to the world through choice. I went home. The shelf where it sat is empty now, but the space isn't. It's full of light. The case was broken by a cup, and in the end I was finally freed by breaking it myself. The last secret was gone. All that was left was the truth, and my life to live in it, unsilenced. The letter from the publisher arrived on a Tuesday. Thick, cream-colored paper. They wanted to publish my novel. They loved, they said, its quiet meditation on identity and the stories we choose to leave behind. The editor asked if M.V. stood for anything, or if I preferred to publish under the pseudonym. I sat at the kitchen table, the empty space on the shelf in my periphery. I wrote back that day, M.V. stands for Martha Vance. I typed, and I will be publishing under my own name. There was a freedom in that decision, a finality that felt more profound than any legal document. It was a declaration. I am here. This is my story. You can find me. The book came out 9 months later. It was not a thriller. It was not a mystery. It was a quiet story about a woman who learns to tend a garden, who finds peace in the routine of baking bread, who falls in love with a quiet man who paints landscapes. It was about the life built after the storm. The critics called it lyrical and profoundly moving. They didn't know it was a memoir in fiction's clothing. Detective Cruz bought a copy. He called me after he'd finished it. "It's a good book, Martha," he said, his voice gentle. "It's peaceful, it is," I agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "I heard about the visit, the one last year, the men in the SUV. You should have called me." "And what would you have done, Marco?" I asked, not unkindly. "Arrest them for sending a photograph, for visiting an old woman in her cabin. The war was over. I just needed to burn the last bridge." He sighed, conceding the point. "The Voss investigation. It's ongoing, it's complicated, white collar, financial. It moves slowly, but it's moving. I know." I said, and I did. It was enough. After the call, I went for a walk. I followed the path Illy had worn through the woods to his favorite painting spot, the overlook above the river. Spring was coming, and the first green shoots were pushing through the dark earth. When I reached the clearing, I stopped. Leaning against the old birch tree he always painted was a man. He was maybe in his late 30s, with a kind, worn face. He had a guitar case at his feet. He wasn't playing. He was just looking out at the water. "This is private land," I said, my voice firm but not hostile. He turned, and he didn't look startled or guilty. He looked resolved. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry for trespassing. I was looking for Martha Vance." My guard went up. "You found her," he nodded, then looked back at the river. "My name is Daniel Keller." The name hit me like a physical blow. Keller, the detective, the man whose flicker of conscience saved my life and whose cowardice condemned me to a ghost's existence. "His son," I whispered. He turned back to me, his eyes full of a pain I recognized. "He told me, at the end, he told me everything about you, about Vance, about what he did, and what he didn't do." Daniel swallowed hard. He was trying to be a good cop and a good father, and he failed at both. He spent his retirement sick with more than cancer. He left me a letter for you. I've been carrying it for 5 years. I didn't know how to find you. Then I saw your book, the author photo. You look like the woman he described. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed, yellowing envelope. My name was on it in a shaky hand, for Lena. I took it, my fingers numb. I didn't open it. Not yet. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I've been carrying his guilt for him," Daniel said simply, "and after reading your book, I realized you've been carrying your life. You shouldn't have to carry his burden, too. I came to give you this and to tell you that I'm sorry for what he did and for what it cost you." He picked up his guitar case. "My father bought me that guitar when I was sick, the treatment. I never knew where the money came from, not until the end." He gave a sad, hollow laugh. "I've been trying to play it for years, but it always felt like it was out of tune. Now I know why." He began to walk away, back down the path. "Daniel," I called out. He stopped. "Your father," I said, choosing my words with care. In that moment, he saw a person, not a problem. "That's why I'm here. That's the only part of his story that matters to me." He didn't turn around, but his shoulders softened. He gave a single, slow nod, and then he was gone. I sat on the flat rock Illy used as a bench. I opened the letter. "Lena, if you are reading this, my son found you, and I am gone. There are no words that can balance the scales. I traded your truth for my son's life. I told myself it was a fair bargain. It was not. It was a coward's math. I followed your case, unofficially, for years. I knew Stern was dead. I suspected Vance was in the wind. I hoped you were, too. When the mug was found in Oregon, I used it to close the case, because a closed case is a forgotten case, and I thought forgetting would keep you safe. More coward's math. I am sorry, not for the detective I was, but for the man I wasn't, the man who could have protected you both. There is no justice in this letter, only an old man's regret, but I wanted you to have one true thing from me. You were never forgotten. Not by me, and clearly not by him. Anyone who would keep a broken cup for a decade is a man who knows how to remember. I hope you found peace. You deserved so much more than any of us gave you. Keller, I folded the letter. The wind picked it up, tugging at the paper. I held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of the old detective's anguish, his son's burden, the tangled web of choices that led us all here. Then I let it go. The wind took it, carried it out over the river, a white flicker against the blue sky, before it dipped down and was lost in the current. The same current that held the pieces of my cup, the same water Illy had painted 1,000 times. I stood up. The empty space on my shelf at home didn't feel like a loss anymore. It felt like an invitation. The story wasn't locked in ceramic or ink or DNA sequences. It was here in the trees, in the river, in the quiet of this clearing. It was in the book with my name on it. It was in the garden waiting for me to plant this year's seeds. The case was broken by a coffee cup, but the life was built by the woman who survived it. I turned my back on the river and walked home, the sun warm on my face, no ghosts at my heels. Only the future, quiet and wide open, finally my own. The article in the Sunday magazine was titled "The Quiet After the Storm." Author Martha Vance finds her voice. The journalist had been gentle, focusing on the novel, the craft, the late in life debut, but she'd done her homework. She'd connected Martha Vance to the decades-old Lena Martin case. She'd spoken to Detective Cruz, who'd given a brief, dignified statement about justice delayed but not denied. She'd even found a retired Omnicorp executive willing to go on record about the unfortunate, rogue actions of a bygone era. They called me a survivor. They called my story a testament to resilience. I read the piece on my porch, my coffee growing cold. The words felt distant, like they were describing a character in a book. They had the shape of my life, but not the weight of it. The weight was in the quiet of the morning, in the smell of the pines, in the absence of a mug on the shelf. A week after the article published, a different kind of package arrived. It was a small, sturdy cardboard box, postmarked from the city I'd fled 25 years ago. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. No name, just the firm. My heart, which had grown steady, gave a single hard knock against my ribs. I carried the box inside, set it on the table, and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't large enough for a threat. It was the size of a shoebox. With careful hands, I cut the tape. Nestled inside, cradled in bubble wrap, was a guitar case, an old, scuffed, brown, hard shell case. I knew it instantly. The case Illy had left behind in my apartment a lifetime ago. The one he told me in our last days held the data tape, the MacGuffin that started it all. There was a note on top, on crisp legal letterhead, MS. Vance, asterisk, per the final settlement and dissolution of assets of the now defunct Omnicorp. All remaining physical evidence from related subsidiary litigations has been ordered destroyed or returned to individuals of record. This item was logged into the county property vault as evidence in case #98-745. Your name is listed as the owner of the premises from which it was seized. As the case is closed and the associated corporation no longer exists to claim it, it is being returned to your custody. Asterisk, please find enclosed the final disposition notice. Sincerely, the clerk of courts. My hands trembled as I popped the latches. The smell that wafted out was of old wood, dust, and time. The guitar inside was just as I remembered it, a well-used sunburst acoustic, Illy's first love before painting. I lifted it gently from the case. It was lighter than I expected. As I did, I saw the small, rectangular shape wrapped in faded velvet at the bottom of the case, right where Illy said he'd hidden it, the data tape, the source of all our pain. It looked so innocuous now, a brittle plastic relic, but next to it, tucked into the curve of the guitar's body, was something else, an envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in my own youthful handwriting. To Gavin, I set the guitar down carefully. I hadn't seen this envelope in 25 years. I'd written it the morning after our first night together, a foolish, romantic note I'd planned to slip into his guitar case before he left for his day job. But then Stern had come, and the world had ended, and I'd forgotten all about it. He must have found it later, after he'd retrieved the guitar from the evidence lock-up. Before he'd hidden the tape, he'd kept it. He'd kept my silly, love-struck note with the thing he was willing to die for. I opened it. My own words in smudged ink leaped out at me. "Gavin, last night was the first real thing that's happened to me in years. This feels like the beginning of a very good story. Don't be a stranger. Yours, Lena." I read it, and a sound escaped me. A cross between a laugh and a sob. The beginning of a very good story. Oh, my younger self. What you didn't know, but then I turned the page over. On the back, in Ellie's familiar, confident script, was a later edition, a reply written across time. "Lena, it was the beginning, and it was a good story. It was the best story. It was ours. It still is. Never forget that, wherever you are. Yours always, Illy." He'd written this later, years later, after he'd found the note, after he'd lost me, after he'd begun his search. He'd been speaking to a ghost, promising a memory that our story mattered. I held the paper to my chest, the two sets of handwriting separated by years of anguish, now pressed together. He'd kept the promise. He'd never forgotten. I looked at the guitar. I'd never learned to play. Illy had tried to teach me once in our second year here, but my fingers were clumsy and I'd laughed and said I had no ear for it. He'd smiled and said, "That's all right. I have enough ear for both of us." Now, on an impulse I didn't understand, I picked it up. I settled it on my lap, the way I'd seen him do 1,000 times. I touched the strings. They were old, slightly out of tune. I placed my fingers on the frets, trying to remember the simple chord he'd shown me. A G major. I strummed. The sound was awful, tinny, discordant, but it was a sound. It was a vibration in the quiet cabin that had known only the sounds of turning pages and the wind. I tried again. My fingers hurt. The chord still sounded wrong, but on the third attempt, something shifted. My finger found the right place. The strings resonated, not perfectly, but together. A warm, full, harmonious sound bloomed in the room. A G chord. It was the first chord he ever taught me, the beginning. I held the note until it faded, listening to it mix with the sound of my own breathing. In that moment, I didn't think of the tape, or the trial, or the cup, or the men in suits. I thought of Illy in a dive bar, playing a melancholic riff. I thought of him on this porch, painting a mountain. I thought of his hands, one holding a paintbrush, the other holding that blue mug. The DNA from a coffee cup broke the case. It shattered the official story. It brought the truth to light, but this guitar, this note, this terrible, beautiful chord, this was what the case was about. This was the thing they were trying to steal, to bury, to silence. Not a tape, a love story, a very good one. I would never be a musician, but I would keep the guitar. I would let it lean in the corner, a familiar shape in my home, a companion to the empty space on the shelf. I placed my hand flat against the guitar's warm wood over the sound hole, feeling the last vibrations of the note hum against my palm. It wasn't an ending. It was another kind of beginning. The story was no longer something that had happened to me. It was something I held. I could finally, truly hold it, and in the quiet after the chord faded, for the first time I felt no absence at all, only a deep, resonant fullness. The case was closed. The story was complete. And the music, however faint, however imperfect, was mine. They held a small, dignified ceremony in the city to formally acknowledge the wrongs of the OmniCorp case. They called it a restorative justice forum. Detective Cruz insisted I be invited. He said it wasn't for them, it was for the record, for the official, public record that would now state, unequivocally, that Elias Vance and Lena Martin were victims. I almost didn't go. The thought of returning to that city, of sitting in a sterile conference room under fluorescent lights, made my skin prickle, but something Cruz said tipped the scales. They're returning the guitar. He told me over the phone. The one from the evidence lock-up. There's some final paperwork to sign for its release. You can just take it and go. So I went. I wore a simple, dark suit. I felt like a visitor from another planet walking into the gleaming government building. The forum was in a windowless room. There were a few officials, a couple of bored-looking reporters, and a video camera on a tripod. Richard Voss was notably absent, represented only by a stern-faced lawyer who recited a prepared statement of regret for past oversights. It was bloodless, meaningless, but then a woman stood up. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes and hands that wouldn't stop twisting a tissue. She was introduced as Carol, the sister, my sister. I had shut that door so completely, so many years ago, that seeing her was like seeing a ghost from a life I'd only read about. She didn't look at the officials. She looked at the camera, and then her gaze found me in the small audience. "For 25 years," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "I believed my sister was dead, murdered by a man she loved. That story was a poison. It infected every happy memory I had of her. It made me doubt my own judgment, my own sister. I grieved, but I grieved for a lie." She took a shaky breath, her eyes locked on mine. "Lena, Martha, I don't know what to call you. I just know that the truth, no matter how hard or how strange, is a gift. You're alive. That's the only fact that matters now. I missed you every single day." It was a punch to the heart, delivered with pure, unvarnished love. I hadn't allowed myself to think of her, of the collateral damage my disappearance had caused. I'd been so focused on survival, on outrunning the darkness, that I'd walled off the good I'd left behind too. The forum ended. People milled about, exchanging stiff pleasantries. Carol hovered at the edge of the room, waiting. I walked over to her. We didn't embrace. We just looked at each other, two women in late middle age, searching for the girls we'd been. "Your hair is different," she finally said, a small, teary smile breaking through. "So is yours." I replied, "You kept it long. You always said it was my best feature." We talked then in rushed, quiet sentences, there by the water cooler. About our parents, gone now, about her children, my nieces and nephews I'd never met, about her life, a normal, quiet life I had once taken for granted. She didn't ask for details about the years in between. She just said, "It must have been so hard," and for the first time I told someone who wasn't Illy or a detective a piece of the truth. It was, I said, "But there was beauty too. I loved a man very much. He was a good man." She nodded as if she'd always known. "I'm glad," she said. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, framed photograph. It was of the two of us on my 20th birthday, arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing into the sun. "I thought you might want this back." I took it, my vision blurring. "Thank you, Carol. Will you stay in touch?" she asked, the hope in her voice so fragile it could break. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. "I will." After signing the release forms in a bland administrative office, a clerk brought out the guitar case. I took it, the final tangible piece being handed back. Carol walked me to the building's exit. On the steps, under the gray city sky, she hesitated. "The article said you live in the mountains now." "I do." "Is it peaceful?" I thought of the empty shelf, the sound of the river, the G-chord hanging in the air. "It is," I said. "It finally is." She hugged me then, a tight, fierce, sisterly hug that smelled of familiar perfume and forgiveness. "Then go home to it," she whispered. The drive back to the cabin felt different. The past was no longer a locked room. It had been aired out. It contained Carol's smile and my parents' memory and the face of my younger self in a photograph. It wasn't just a landscape of fear and running anymore. It was whole. When I got home, I didn't put the guitar in the corner. I placed the framed photograph of Carol and me on the mantel. Then I took the guitar and sat with it on the porch as the evening settled in. I didn't try to play, I just held it. I thought about the journey of this object, from Ellie's hands in a smoky bar, to an evidence locker, to a corporate vault, and now back to me. It had been a silent witness, just like the cup. But its song had never been heard. An idea began to form, not a thought, but a feeling, a completion. The next morning, I drove to the local community center. I found the notice board, and I pinned up a small hand-written flyer. Guitar lessons offered, beginner, one student only, no charge, in memory of a musician who believed everyone has an ear for music if they only listen. I left my number. I didn't know if anyone would call. It didn't matter. I was home later that afternoon when the phone rang. A young voice, hesitant, asked about the lessons. A teenager named Sam who'd found an old guitar in his grandfather's attic, but couldn't make it sound like anything but noise. "I can't promise I'll make you a musician," I told him, echoing Illy's words to me, "but I can teach you a G chord." When I hung up, I looked around my home. The photograph of Carol smiled from the mantel. The space on the shelf was still empty, but it was a clean emptiness, a space for light. The guitar waited by the door. The case had been broken by a coffee cup. The silence had been broken by science and confession. But the life, my life, was being mended now by quieter things, by a sister's forgiveness, by a chord yet to be taught, by the choice to turn evidence into an instrument and a secret into a story shared. The mystery was solved, the thriller was over, but the melody, it seemed, was just beginning, and this time I was no longer just a character in it. I was the one holding the guitar, ready to teach someone else how to listen for the music in the quiet. Sam arrived for his first lesson on a Tuesday afternoon. He was 15, all elbows and nervous energy, clutching the old guitar from his grandfather's attic like it was a live animal. He had the same wide, dyed, hunted look I'd seen in the mirror for years. "It just sounds bad," he said, despairing, after a few fumbling attempts at tuning. "That's because it's a conversation you haven't learned yet." I said, remembering, "You're speaking gibberish to it. It's answering in kind. Let's start with listening." I showed him the G chord. The same one Illy had shown me. I positioned his fingers on the fretboard, his skin warm and pliant under my guidance. "Now, don't just hit it," I said. "Press firmly and then draw the sound out, like you're asking it a question." He strummed. It was a dull thud. Again, I said, patiently, "Listen for the vibration, not just the noise." On the third try, a clear, resonant note bloomed in my quiet living room. Sam's eyes shot up to mine, startled, then lit with a pure, undiluted triumph. It was the same look Illy got when a painting finally captured the light just right. "That's it," I said, and my own heart soared with a vicarious joy. "That's the beginning." The lessons became our weekly ritual. I taught him chords, C, D, M. He taught me about his world, the relentless pressure of school, the quiet anxiety of existing online, the solace he couldn't quite find. He never asked about my past. The magazine article had never reached his orbit, and to him I was just Martha, the quiet lady in the cabin who knew about guitars and listened without judgment. One rainy afternoon, as he practiced a simple chord progression, he said, "My mom says you wrote a book." I did. "What's it about?" I paused, watching the rain streak down the window. "It's about building a life," I said, piece by piece, about how the quiet things, the gardening, the baking, the watching of seasons, those are the things that save you after the noise ends. He nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. My granddad's guitar was just sitting in the attic, quiet. Now it's not. He played the G chord again, clean and strong. It's a good sound now. That simple statement echoed in me long after he left. It's a good sound now. The object, once dormant and full of dust, now held music. It had a purpose again. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about integrating it into a new song. I began to write again. Not a novel this time, just notes, fragments, memories of Illy that weren't stained with fear, the way he'd hum off key while making coffee, the precise flick of his wrist when he'd load a paintbrush. The solid, quiet weight of him beside me in bed, a fortress in the dark. I wrote them down on index cards, one memory per card. I didn't know what they were for. I just needed to pin them to the world to prove they had existed. The stack of cards grew on my desk, a fragile paper cairn. One morning, I received an email from the community center. They were hosting a small arts and stories evening, a potluck with short, informal shares, a poem, a song, a few minutes of personal history. They asked if I'd like to contribute, given my local author status. My first instinct was a solid, visceral no. The thought of standing before even a friendly crowd made my palms sweat. Public silence had been my armor for decades. But then I looked at the stack of index cards, at the guitar leaning in the corner, at the empty shelf, which no longer felt like a hole but like a breath held. I wrote back, I don't have a poem, but I might have a few chords and a very short story, if that's acceptable. The night of the event, the community hall was warm and loud, smelling of casserole and coffee. Sam was there with his parents, giving me a tight, encouraging nod. Carol had driven up for the weekend and sat in the front row, beaming. About 30 neighbors filled the folding chairs. My turn came. I walked to the front, carrying Ellie's guitar. My mouth was dry. I'm not a musician. I began, my voice unsteady. This guitar belonged to my husband, Illy. For a long time, it was just evidence, proof of something that was lost. I recently learned to play one chord on it, and I recently learned that a story, even a broken one, isn't really over until you decide how it gets told. I looked at Carol, at Sam, at the kind, expectant faces of my neighbors who knew me only as Martha, the writer who kept to herself. So this is a G chord, I said, and I played it. The sound filled the hall, clean and warm. And this is a story about a coffee cup. I didn't tell them about corporate espionage or DNA or fugitive years. I told them a simpler truth. I told them about a promise made in a moment of terror, about a man who kept that promise for a decade, using a chipped blue mug as his compass. I told them about mending, about kintsugi, about how the breaks, once repaired with gold, become the strongest part. I told them about the peace that comes not from forgetting, but from holding the pieces in the light. As I spoke, I played the G chord between sentences, a simple, steady anchor, a punctuation mark of resilience, the case. I said finishing was solved by science, by DNA from that cup, but the life was saved by the promise, by the mending, by the choice every day to drink from the cup, to play the chord, to tell the story, even quietly, even just to yourself. I strummed the G chord one last time, letting it ring out into a profound, respectful silence. Then Sam, from the middle of the crowd, began to clap, not a polite patter, but a solid, enthusiastic applause. The room erupted around him. Carol was crying, smiling. People I barely knew nodded with understanding. I hadn't given them a thriller. I'd given them a love story, and it was enough. Afterwards, as people milled and ate pie, an elderly man named Walter, who ran the hardware store, approached me. He had kind, watery eyes and gnarled hands. That was something, Martha, he said, reminded me of my Edith. She's been gone 10 years. I still have her favorite mixing bowl, got a crack in it. I could never throw it out. He shook his head, a little embarrassed. Silly, I know. I reached out and touched his arm. It's not silly, Walter. It's a witness. That's all any of these things are. Witnesses to a love that happened. He looked at me, and a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. He just nodded wordlessly and moved on. I drove Carol back to the cabin. The night was clear, the stars sharp and cold. You did good today, Lena, she said, using my old name deliberately, lovingly. I felt him here, I said, the words surprising me as I said them, not as a ghost, just as a fact, a part of the story I was telling. He is, she said simply. The next morning, after Carol left, I sat at my desk. The stack of index cards sat before me. I picked up a pen. On a fresh card, I wrote a single sentence. The DNA broke the case, but love wrote the story. I took the card and walked to the empty shelf. I didn't put a new object there. Instead, I propped the small, framed photograph of Carol and me on it, and I leaned the index card against the frame. The space was no longer empty. It held a new memory. It held a truth I could finally say out loud. It held the beginning of whatever song came next. The forensics were complete. The evidence had been heard. Now it was just life. Beautiful, ordinary, resonant life. And it was mine. The letter from the music school was addressed to the estate of Elias Vance. It had been forwarded twice, following a trail of old post office boxes and dead ends, before finally landing in my mailbox. The return address was for a small, prestigious conservatory in the city, one known for fostering unconventional talent. My hands went cold. The envelope was thick, official. For a dizzying moment, I feared a new claim, a debt, some forgotten fragment of the past rising to stake its claim. I opened it with a kitchen knife. Inside was a letter from the head of the composition department, and a smaller, sealed envelope, yellowed and fragile, addressed to Illy, in a flowing, artistic script I didn't recognize. To the executor of the Vance estate, *, we are conducting an archival project on the influences of late 20th century underground music. During our research, we discovered a collection of works donated anonymously to our library many years ago. Among them was a demo tape and several handwritten scores attributed to an artist who performed under the name Gavin. The contact information was a defunct P.O. box. Through copyright records, we have traced the legal name to Elias Vance. *, the work is raw but shows exceptional promise. A unique melodic voice. As part of our project, we have digitized the tape. We are seeking permission to include one of the compositions, a piece titled Lena's Theme, in a small, curated listening library for our students. It is a beautiful, haunting piece. Enclosed is the original demo tape, returned to the estate, along with the only personal item found with the scores, a sealed letter. We felt it should be returned to his family. Sincerely, Professor Alastair Finch, Lena's Theme. The song he'd teased me about in the hollow note the night before the world ended. He'd really written it, and he'd sent it out into the world, a message in a bottle with my name on it, long before he ever sent those coded ads about a blue mug. I picked up the smaller envelope. The paper felt like ash under my fingers. I broke the seal. The letter inside was a single sheet, covered in the same flowing script. Illy, I heard your tape. A friend passed it along. I don't do this often, but I had to write. Lena's Theme is the real thing. It's not just a song, it's a portrait. You've captured a whole person in a melody, her strength, her sadness, the hidden hope. It's rare. I have a small studio backing. If you're serious, and if you're free, come find me. Don't let this voice go silent. The world has enough noise. It needs more of this. J, beneath the initial, was a phone number and a studio address, both a quarter century out of date. J. Julian James, a producer, a mentor, someone who had heard the music in Illy and wanted to amplify it, an opportunity that had arrived in some lost P.O. box at the exact moment Illy was becoming a ghost, hunted for a crime he didn't commit. He never got this letter. He never got the chance to be serious, to be free. His voice had gone silent, not by choice, but by a man named Stern, a corrupt detective, a data tape in a guitar case. A grief I thought I had fully metabolized rose in me, fresh and choking. It wasn't the grief for the man I lost, but for the man the world lost, the artist who never was, the music never played, the life not lived. It was a new kind of ghost, and it stood in my kitchen, holding this letter. I found the demo tape in the bottom of the envelope, a plain, black cassette with a handwritten label, * Gavin Demos 98 *. I didn't have a cassette player. Nobody did anymore. It took me a week to find one online, a cheap plastic thing from a nostalgia website. When it arrived, I waited until dusk. I poured a glass of wine for courage. I slid the tape in and pressed play. The sound was faint, scratched with hiss. A few chords, experimental, searching. Then his voice. Not the performing voice from the bar, but a quieter, closer voice, singing softly into a cheap microphone. They say the quiet ones have the loudest ghosts. Hers are in the steam that rises from a cup she chose. A simple ceramic promise against the coming night. She holds the warmth and waits and turns out all the light. The lyrics were about me. About the waitress smoking under the awning, about the way I held a coffee mug between shifts. He had seen me, truly seen me, and turned it into this aching, tender melody. The song built, a simple guitar line weaving around his voice, hopeful and melancholic all at once. It was a love song, but also a song of witnessing. It was the sound of being seen. I listened to it 5 times in a row. I cried not soft tears, but great, heaving sobs that came from a place deeper than sorrow. It was the sound of a stolen future, finally audible. The next day I called Professor Finch. His voice was warm, academic. I told him I was Ellie's widow, and that I had received the tape. "Ah, Mrs. Vance," he said. "A pleasure. Lena's theme is quite special. It has a purity to it. My students hear it and ask, 'Who was this? Why did he stop?' He didn't stop," I said, my voice thick. "He was stopped, but I would be honored for you to use it. I think he would have wanted that, for students to hear it, for it to be useful." We spoke a while longer. He asked gentle questions about Ellie's influences, about his life. I told him about the paintings. He found another voice. I said, "Sometimes the song needs to become color." The professor mused. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. You've given a lost piece of music a home." After I hung up, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't bring back Ellie's music career, but I could complete the circuit. I could deliver the letter. Sam came for his lesson that afternoon. He was working on a simple song of his own now, a few chords in an order that pleased him. "Sam," I said after we'd finished, "how would you like to learn a new song, a very old one? It only has a few chords." He shrugged, eager. "Sure." I taught him the chords to Lena's theme, G, C, M, D. The same progression Illy had played a lifetime ago. I didn't tell him the story. I just showed him the shapes his fingers needed to make. Now, I said, when he could move between them smoothly, "Play them in that order, but slowly, and listen. Don't just play the chords. Play the space between them." He began. The chords in his young, unsteady hands were the same, G, C, M, D, but as he played, focusing, listening, something happened. The ghost of Illy's melody seemed to hover in the air between the notes. Sam wasn't playing the song, not really, but he was playing its skeleton. He was playing its possibility. When he finished, he looked up. "It sounds sad, but good sad. It is," I said. "It's a very good sad." I printed a clean copy of the letter from Jay. I put it in a new envelope. That evening, I built a small fire in the pit behind the cabin. I took the original yellowed letter and the demo tape. I held them for a long moment, feeling the weight of the lost chance, the parallel life. Then, one by one, I fed them to the flames. The paper curled, blackened, vanished into light and heat. The plastic tape warped, melted, its magnetic memory erased into smoke. I wasn't destroying evidence. I was performing a ritual, releasing the ghost of that other Illy, the one who got the letter, who took the meeting, who made the record. Letting that dream go so the man I knew, the painter, the keeper of promises, my husband, could remain whole and true. The last of the tape fizzed into nothing. The fire died down to embers. I went inside and took the index card from the shelf, the one that read, "The DNA broke the case." But Love wrote the story. I turned it over. On the blank back, I wrote a new line in my firmest handwriting. And sometimes Love leaves a melody. I propped it back on the shelf, the new message facing out. It wasn't an ending. It was an amendment, a footnote to the story. The case was broken by a coffee cup. The future was stolen by a letter never received. But the man, the real man, had lived a life of profound fidelity. He had turned his song into color, and his promise into a lifetime. That was the music that mattered. And now, in a way, it was a music that could be taught. A few simple chords, passed from his hand to mine, to Sam's, echoing into a future he never saw. The DNA provided the proof, but this fragile chain of listening, this was the legacy. The mountain winter was long and deep, a quiet blanket of white that hushed the world. I taught Sam through the short afternoons, the chords growing more complex, the space between us filling with a comfortable, wordless understanding. He never asked about the past. The present, in that warm room with the guitar, was enough. When the thaw came, bringing mud and the first brave crocuses, something in me thawed too. The sharp edges of the story had been worn smooth by time and telling. It was no longer a wound. It was a topography, a landscape I had learned to inhabit. One bright morning in April, I drove into town for groceries. As I passed the old community hall, I saw a new sign being hung, Spring Flea Market and Antiques Fair Saturday. I hadn't been to one in decades. The thought of crowded aisles and the murmur of barter had always felt like a threat, a place where a face from the past could materialize. But that day I felt a strange pull, not a compulsion, but a curiosity. Saturday arrived sunny and clear. On an impulse I went. The hall was bustling, full of the gentle chaos of second-hand treasures. Tables groaned under stacks of china, racks of faded clothing, boxes of forgotten paperbacks. I wandered, not looking for anything, just observing the life of things that had outlived their first purpose. Then I saw it. At the end of a cluttered table, between a tarnished candelabra and a stack of old maps, sat a coffee cup. It was ceramic, it was navy blue, it was chipped on the left handle. My breath stopped, the world narrowed to that one spot of color. It wasn't the cup, of course, that was impossible. Those fragments were at the bottom of the river, the gold seeming dissolved into silt. This was a cousin, a doppelganger, mass-produced probably from some long-defunct diner, a piece of someone else's mundane history. I picked it up. It was cool and light in my hand. The chip was clean, not repaired with gold, just a raw, white scar in the glaze. It was empty. It held only potential. The elderly woman running the table smiled. "Nice, isn't it? Sturdy, holds heat." "How much?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. $2. I paid her. I carried the cup through the crowd, cradling it not like a relic, but like a new purchase. I took it home. I placed it on the kitchen counter. I looked at it. It was just a cup, a cheap, chipped navy blue cup. I filled the kettle. I ground fresh coffee beans. A dark roastily would have liked. I warmed the cup with hot water, then emptied it. I poured the steaming coffee into it. The dark liquid filled it to just below the chip. I carried it to the porch. I sat in my usual chair. I lifted the cup to my lips and drank. The coffee was just coffee, hot, bitter, familiar. The cup was just a cup. It held the liquid without ceremony, but in that simple, ordinary act, buying a cup, making coffee, drinking it in the sun, I felt a final, quiet click of closure. I was not replicating the past. I was not building a shrine. I was simply choosing a vessel for my morning, and in a flea market full of possibilities, my eye had been drawn to the shape of a memory, not to haunt me, but to hold my coffee. It was a choice, the most ordinary, powerful choice in the world. Later that week, Sam finished his song. He played it for me, his fingers confident now, his head tilted as he listened to the chords find each other. It was simple, sweet, about a bike ride down a hill with no hands. It was nothing like Lena's theme. It was entirely his own. "That's wonderful, Sam," I said when he finished. "You wrote a song." He beamed, a flash of pure, uncomplicated pride. "Thanks for teaching me the alphabet," he said. That night I sat at my desk. The stack of index cards about Illy was tall and soft-edged. The note about the melody was on the shelf. The new blue cup was drying by the sink. I opened my laptop. I started a new document. I didn't title it. I just began to type. They say a case was broken by DNA from a coffee cup, and that's true as far as it goes. Science provided the key. It turned a silent witness into a testimony that could stand in court. But a cup is just a cup until a promise is poured into it. It's just ceramic until it becomes a map for a lost man, a compass pointing home. The DNA told us what happened. The promise tells us why it mattered. They hunted him for a secret on a tape, but the real secret was in the keeping of a vow, in the drinking from a chipped rim every morning for 10 years. In the mending of the broken pieces with gold, not to hide the breaks, but to make them part of the story. The forensics are complete. The evidence has been logged, analyzed, and filed away. The mystery is solved. What remains is not a mystery at all. It is the quiet aftermath. It is the gardening. It is the teaching of a chord to a boy who needed a good sound. It is the smile of a sister rediscovered. It is the writing of words that try and fail and try again to capture the color of a piece that was hard, won, and it is the drinking of coffee from a new cup on a sunny porch simply because you like the color blue. The case is closed. The story is told. The love. The love was the fingerprint on everything. The one piece of evidence that never faded, that science could never fully explain, and that, in the end, was the only thing that ever really needed to be proved. I saved the document. I didn't know if it was an epilogue, a preface to something new, or just a letter to myself. It didn't matter. I went to the shelf. I took down the index card about the melody. I took down the photograph of Carol and me. I placed the new blue cup between them. It wasn't a replacement. It was a successor. The story began with a cup and a promise. It ends with a cup and a choice. Not to remember the past, but to live in a present that the past made possible. A present where the only thing hunted is the perfect morning light, and the only thing pursued is the next good chord, the next true sentence, the next quiet joy. The DNA broke the case, but life, simple, stubborn, beautiful life, mended it. One ordinary morning at a time, the seasons turned one into the next with the gentle inevitability of breath. Sam grew taller, his fingers stretching to form bar chords I could never manage. He started a band with friends, their music a cheerful, raucous contrast to the solitary melody that had brought us together. He still came by sometimes to play me a new riff or complain about calculus. He caught